On the borders between Central and West Africa lies Cameroon, a country with a population of over 30 million people, a civil war-torn zone, and a dictator president that has held on to power for over 4 decades. Most African leaders are known for holding on to power, but Cameroonian leaders take it to a whole different level. From the National Assembly to the Senate, the country has some of the oldest and longest-serving members of government in the world. Cameroon has a very interesting but sad history filled with fraud, deceits, and disappointments. For over 6 years now, the country has been in a brutal civil war which has led to the death of millions of people, destruction of properties, and separation of families. Today, Cameroon is one of the most corrupt countries in the world with some of the most dormant and ineffective leaders. Its current president, Paul Biya, has become an embarrassment to the country. At 90 years old and 40 years in office, he is currently the oldest president in the world and the second longest serving president in Africa after Obiang Mbasogo, the current president of Equatorial Guinea. Biya makes at most 2 public appearances per year, the first on the 11th of February when the country is celebrating its Youth Day and 20th of May when the country is celebrating its National Day. In recent times, there has been 0 public appearances from the president. In fact, the country can crash and burn, and the president will not say a word, and that is how his regime has been for over 30 years. At the just concluded U.S.-African summit, he made a fool of himself when he was asked to address a crowd. First, he took forever to mount the stage, and when he finally did, he started asking if the audience had important personalities, and if it was important for him to speak. This singular act raised an intense conversation in the country if they still had a president. Before Paul Biya took power in 1982, Cameroon was a country on the path to greatness. It was peaceful, economically buoyant, and was beginning to develop its infrastructures. But after 1982, things started going downhill for the country, and today, the country has become a shadow of itself with a dying economy, dilapidating infrastructure, angry people, and widespread insecurity. To better understand how the country got to this point, it is important we go back down memory lane and trace the origin of its conflicts. If this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notification so you don't miss out on any of our amazing productions. Prior to the First World War that started in 1914, Cameroon was under German rule for 34 years. During the First World War, France and Britain, who were allies, combined forces and defeated Germany. Cameroon was eventually partitioned between Britain and France, and since then, things have never been the same again. France was given 80% of the territory, while Britain received 20%. The reason Britain received a smaller portion was because Britain already had control over a lot of territories, coupled with the fact that they had already started invading the Cameroon from the southwest and northwest, since it was closer to Nigeria, which already belonged to them. After France and Britain took total control over their territories, they changed the name of the country from Cameroon to Cameroon, with both having different spellings. Both territories became French Cameroon and British Cameroon. France and Britain implemented their way of life and governance to their respective territories. France implemented the policy of assimilation, where they forced the locals to change everything about themselves and embrace the French culture and way of life. The locals were to speak like the French, eat like the French, and even dress like the French. Britain, on the other hand, due to its policy of divide and rule, further partitioned its own portion of Cameroon into 2 and named it British Northern Cameroon, which was administered as part of Northern Nigeria, and British Southern Cameroon, which was administered as part of Eastern Nigeria. Together, both territories were administered by the British central government in Lagos. The people of British Northern Cameroon were treated fairly, and they had a good relationship with Northern Nigeria, while the people of British Southern Cameroon felt slighted. They were discriminated upon and treated unfairly. In 1953, the Southern Cameroon's representatives in the Eastern Nigerian legislature demanded from Britain a regional status for the Southern Cameroons, with seat of government in Boya. In 1953, 3 activists from Southern Cameroon, by name Dr. Emmanuel Ndeli Mbela, John Nelfonchar, and Solomon Tading Nuna, left the National Council for Nigeria and the Cameroons, NCNC, established by the British, and formed a party called Cameroon National Congress, KNC, with the sole aim of fighting for an independent Southern Cameroon. After hard struggle from the Cameroon National Congress, Britain finally accepted a legislature in Southern Cameroon, The Order in Council of 1954 established in Buea a legislative house known as the House of Assembly of the Southern Cameroons and an executive council. During this time, Southern Cameroons gained limited autonomy as a quasi-region within the Nigerian Federation. The first seating of the newly created House of Assembly of the Southern Cameroon met on 26 October 1954. Dr. Emmanuel Belalifafi Endeli emerged as leader of the Southern Cameroons. His official title was Leader of Government Business, the reason being that the Southern Cameroons was a quasi-region and therefore only semi-autonomous. In 1955, Endeli's political views changed and he advocated for greater integration of Southern Cameroon with Nigeria, which made John Foncha and Solomon Muna to leave the party and create an opposition party called the Cameroon National Democratic. In 1957 United Nations resolutions, termed 64 of 26 February 1957, called on the administering authorities to hasten arrangements for trust territories to attain self-governance or independence. After the resolution by the United Nations, Southern Cameroons attained the status of a full region and became autonomous and fully self-governing, and the House of Chiefs was also created. This meant an election was to be conducted to vote in the new Prime Minister. The election was mainly between John Foncha's KNDP and Dr. Endeli's KNC. Dr. Endeli won the elections and became the first Prime Minister of Southern Cameroon. Few months later, Dr. Endeli was replaced by John Foncha, whose ideologies of functioning independently from Nigeria was highly accepted by the people of Southern Cameroons. Foncha became the second Prime Minister on the 1st of February 1959. 1 month after Foncha became Prime Minister, the United Nations decided to put an end to trusteeship by 1960. French Cameroon was the second sub-Saharan country after Guinea to gain its independence on the 1st of January 1960. Britain was asked to conduct a plebiscite in its territory, and they gave the people of Southern Cameroon 2 options. Number 1, do you wish to achieve independence by joining the Independent Federation of Nigeria? Number 2, do you wish to achieve independence by joining the Independence Republic of Cameroon? The reason why British Cameroon wasn't given a third option for independence was because it had been reported that Southern Cameroon was not economically capable of sustaining itself as an independent state. During the plebiscite, which took place on the 11th of February 1961, British Northern Cameroon, which had already been integrated to Nigeria, massively voted to join Nigeria, while British Cameroon reluctantly voted to join French Cameroon. British Northern Cameroon eventually joined Nigeria in June 1961, while British Southern Cameroon joined French Cameroon on October 1st. British Northern Cameroon, which was predominantly Muslims, formed part of today's Borno, Adamawa, and Taraba states of. Since the plebiscites, 11th February is celebrated in Cameroon as Youth Day, and it's also a public holiday. Now, the choice of calling this day Youth Day instead of unification is an entirely different story. This is one of the days where the president of the country is seen. After Southern Cameroon voted to join French Cameroon, it was agreed that Britain, the UN, Southern Cameroon, and French Cameroon will meet in July to discuss the terms of federation and draft the constitution. 2 weeks before the meeting, there were reports that more than 100 people were killed by terrorists in some towns in French Cameroon, particularly in Loun, Barfang, Dioun, and Douala. The reports worried unification advocates who wanted British Cameroon to unify with French Cameroon. For this reason, Fubin was chosen to host the conference because it was peaceful, had a good climate, and had recently been renovated. The leaders of French Cameroon wanted to make an impression and portray Ahidjo as a good leader who had everything under control. Before the leaders of Southern Cameroon went to Founben, they met in Bamenda and deliberated on points that would be included in the constitution. Amongst many things, the leaders of Southern Cameroon who were in Bamenda agreed on the non-centralized federation to ensure that there was a distinction between the powers of the states and the powers of the federation. During the conference, which lasted 3 days, the United Nations and Britain didn't show up, leaving just the 2 Cameroons to their fate, which is where everything went wrong. Ahidjo, who was the president of the newly independent French Cameroon, presented a draft constitution to the people of Southern Cameroon. A conference, which was supposed to establish a new constitution, instead became a modification of Ahidjo's proposed constitution. There was intense deliberations and negotiations, and due to the fact that the French Cameroon delegation outnumbered the Southern Cameroon delegation, most of the proposals presented by Southern Cameroon were rejected and just a handful were accepted. At the end of the conference, some major decisions were reached. It was concluded that the country would become the Federal Republic of Cameroon, with both English and French as its official languages. However, a bicameral legislature and the decentralization of power was rejected, and instead, a unique camera system and the centralized system of government was adopted. According to reports, part of the Southern Cameroon delegation had wished for the conference to be extended so they could negotiate more, but some Southern Cameroonian leaders like Foncha were too happy to be reuniting with their brothers. Coupled with the fact that they were given VIP treatment during the conference, they didn't really see a need for the constitution for the new Federal Republic was agreed in Yaoundé in August 1961 between Ahidjo and Foncha, pending approval by the House of Assembly of the two states. In the end, the West Cameroon House of Assembly never ratified the constitution. However, on October 1st, 1961, the Federal Republic of Cameroon nevertheless came to fruition with Ahidjo as president and John New Foncha as vice president. French Cameroon became East Cameroon and Southern Cameroon became West Cameroon. But for the purpose of this video, we shall continue using their former names for better understanding. On the 30th September, the British administrators left the Southern Cameroons. The next day, the Army of French Cameroon marched over the border. The mobile wing armed police of the Southern Cameroons was disarmed by them. It is described as a forceful takeover. An official from French Cameroon was appointed in the position of a Governor General over the Southern Cameroons. His official title was Inspector Federal Administration. He was accountable directly to the President of French Cameroon. Then followed a host of other French Cameroon civil servants, including subsequently its police force, which literally took over Southern Cameroons. In 1965, Augustin Juo became the Prime Minister of Southern Cameroon, but was sacked by President Ahidjo in 1968 and replaced by St. Muna. French advisors of President Ahidjo recommended the introduction of bilingual schools to educate and assimilate Southern Cameroonians in favor of French Cameroon. The aim was to slowly absorb the Anglo-Saxon Southern Cameroonians into the Francophone hemisphere. That happened additionally to the massive deployment of administrators from East Cameroon. At this point, tensions started rising in Southern Cameroon, which led to Foncha expressing his unhappiness with Ahidjo's progressive assimilation and marginalization of the people of Southern Cameroons. Ahidjo sacked him from the position of vice president and replaced him with St. Muna in 1970. In 1972, President Ahidjo declared to conduct a referendum about the form of the state. The Southern Cameroon's lawmakers heavily opposed and rejected that idea, stating that the articles in the Fundment documents that read thus, "Any proposal for the revision of the present constitution, which impairs the unity and integrity of the federation, shall be inadmissible, and proposals for the revision shall be adopted by simple majority vote of the members of the Federal Assembly, provided that such majority includes a majority of the representatives of each of the federated states, not through referendum." Ahidjo ignored the concerns. So under duress, and to avoid bloodshed, Southern Cameroonians submitted to Ahidjo's decision on 20th May 1972. The referendum was conducted with a favorable outcome for Ahidjo. The whole process was in violation of Article 47 of the Constitution of the Federation, which prohibited any attempts to change the federal form of the state. The name of the state was changed from Federal Republic of Cameroon to the United Republic of Cameroon. Ahidjo then divided Southern Cameroon into two parts, which he called Northwest and Southwest provinces, today known as regions. At the time, Southern Cameroonians were totally against Ahidjo's regime, and animosity started to increase among Southern Cameroonians because they felt totally disrespected and marginalized. Despite the fact that Southern Cameroonians were against Ahidjo's decisions, Cameroon, as a country, was doing well economically, but most resources was being moved to French Cameroon. Development projects proposed by Southern Cameroonian leaders were either rejected, cancelled, or executed in French Cameroon. Due to health issues, Ahidjo could not continue as president, so he handed over power to Paul Biya, whom he had been grooming for a long time. When Biya took over power from Ahidjo, he further aggravated the whole situation by single-handedly changing the name of the country, the initial name of French Cameroon after independence. The change led to the removal of one star from the flag, which represented the two states, implying Cameroon was one and indivisible state. Southern Cameroon, through several efforts, fought to return to federalism, but all their efforts were abortive. And it was during their struggle to return to federalism, or worst-case scenario, secession, that the word Ambazonia was first used by lawyer and political activist Fawn Gorgie Dinka, where he called on the people of southern Cameroon to secede and form a new state known as the Republic of Ambazonia. During the presidential election in 1992, Southern Cameroonians and a vast majority of French Cameroonians rallied behind John Frundi because they felt if they couldn't get secession at least, they should get someone from Southern Cameroon rule the country, because they believed if they had a Southern Cameroonian as president, they would return to federalism. Unfortunately, John Frundi lost to Paul Biya. Despite the massive protests that followed the proclamation of the results due to claim of elections irregularities, Biya was sworn in as president for a second term in November. The government of French Cameroon continued to suppress the people of Southern Cameroon, and in 1994 John Du Foncha and Solomon Muna, both former prime ministers of the Southern Cameroons, returned to the United Nations in New York and demanded separate independence for the Southern Cameroons. The mission to the United Nations preceded the All Anglophone Conference AAC1, which took place in Boya, bringing together all Southern Cameroonian citizens who unanimously called for the restoration of the statehood of the Southern Cameroons. A second All Anglophone Conference AAC2 was held in Bamenda, at which the decisions of AAC1 were reiterated and a reasonable time given to French Cameroon to accept a return to the two-state federation, failing which the people of the Southern Cameroons would be left with no other option than to revive its statehood and revise its independence. The implementation of AAC1 and AAC2 were however stalled by the brutal arrest and incarceration of the leaders of the AAC, with several others escaping into exile. The desire for self-determination remained alive in the people of Southern Cameroons till October 2016, when everything escalated and took another turn. The crisis started with the teachers' and lawyers' peaceful protest. The lawyers had sent an ultimatum to the government of Cameroon calling for a redeployment of French-speaking judges from English-speaking courts and the translation of the Ohata Law from French to English. The Cameroon government initially responded by cracking down on lawyers' demonstrations, as well as the protesters and insurgents. This led to a full-fledged guerrilla war in southern Cameroons, as teachers and students joined the lawyers in protest. Something that initially started as a peaceful demonstration gradually metamorphosed into a full-blown civil war. The lawyers and teachers were accused to be the cause of the crisis, but in reality, the ongoing crisis in Cameroon was caused by years of marginalization. On the 1st of October 2017, at the climax of the crisis, the separatists from southern Cameroon declared the independence of southern Cameroon, which led to more violence. On November 30, 2017, the president of Cameroon declared war on the Anglophone separatists. This marked the start of a very violent confrontation between government forces and armed separatists. The conflict started in Manu Division, where the Ambazonia Defense Force operated. From there, the conflict spread to other parts like Libialam, Fako, Momo, Bui, and Ngokatunja. Several armed fractions have emerged, such as the Red Dragons, Tigers, and Seven Kata, amongst others. Several villages and towns have been burned down, such as Kwakwa, Kembong, Tado, and on 5 January 2018, members of the Ambazonian interim government, including its presidency Sisiku Julius Ariuk, were arrested in Nigeria and deported to Cameroon. They were subsequently arrested and spent 10 months at a gendarmerie headquarters before being transferred to a maximum security prison in Yaoundé. A trial started in December 2018. Fast forward to 2023, the governments have tried every single measure possible to put an end to the crisis to no avail. Apparently, the people of southern Cameroon are determined to end the crisis only after they secede from French Cameroon, or at least return to the 1961 constitution drafted during the Falmouth Conference. Since the beginning of the crisis, almost 1 million lives have been lost, property destroyed, and families separated. At this point, the government of Cameroon doesn't really know what to do anymore. As of the making of this video, Cameroon is one of the most unsafe countries in the world, especially if you intend to visit the English-speaking regions of the country. From the history we just explained in this video, it can be said that Britain and France ruined Cameroon. If you want to know how, then subscribe to the channel and stay tuned, because in our next video we will give you more details.